Today I'm back in the Biscayne Point neighborhood, one of my go-to favorite spots that I like to walk every once in a while. It's totally the opposite of the mall. I know a lot of you didn't like the mall video because it was too noisy and too much going on. And just imagine me, guys, trying to stay on track and give you all the right information without screwing it up with a million people walking past me and talking and whatever. And it was a tough video to make, but honestly, I don't like doing stuff like that either. I'd much rather be out here. And by the way, one of my subscribers, Paul, he lives in this neighborhood, and I forgot to bring his phone number with because I just met him the other day over at George's. So next time I'm over this way, I'll have to pass by and see you in one of the videos. Now, what's the way out of all this mess that we're in right now? We have so many problems that are coming together all at once. We're still dealing with inflation, even though they say it's going down, but things are still more expensive than ever. We have a lot of people that still cannot afford to buy a home. We have wages that are actually falling year over year when you factor inflation in, and you have retail sales going down. We have the banking crisis that has really just begun, the credit crunch to go along with that. How do we get out of all of this? Well, they asked Jeremy Grantham this recently, who is a big shot. Here's what he had to say. First of all, he blames the central banks for getting us into this mess, which I agree with, because they just kept interest rates too low for too long and allowed this asset bubble to basically spiral out of control. And now they're afraid to let it spiral out of control in the downward direction, because obviously a lot of these guys have special interests. They probably have a lot of their wealth tied up into these asset bubbles. They also have lobbyists that don't want that to happen. They don't want the housing market to crash or the stock market to crash, and they'll do or say anything in their power to try to make sure that doesn't happen. But this is what Grantham said. He said that every Federal Reserve chair since Alan Greenspan, who led the U.S. Central Bank from 1987 to 2006, so since I was born, guys, I was born in 87, okay, that this policy's basically been in effect. And the policy is that lower rates are good for you. And Grantham says, where has this got us? What has this delivered? It's delivered a series of great bubbles that then break and inflict a lot of pain. So these bubbles are so great on the way up and not so great on the way down. And it sounds a lot like me and this guy Jeremy Grantham think a lot alike, because he thinks the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell, should follow the lead of Paul Volcker, who came before Alan Greenspan, who had no problem raising interest rates to double digits in order to get inflation under control. Now, right away you can say, oh, inflation was higher back then than it is now. It's not necessary to go that high. They've only raised it to barely 5% and the economy's already starting to break and this and that. But I disagree. I think things need to break way more than they're breaking now in order to have any semblance of normalcy ever again, guys, because the reality is, if things don't break, then you're not going to be able to afford a regular middle-class American life that everybody dreams about. If no one can afford a place to live or to buy a decent car or to put food on the table or anything like that, how is that a good life, you know? It's not a life worth living. It's not why people live in the U.S. Wow, check out that old Corvette. That's beautiful. So obviously, when Paul Volcker raised the interest rates back in the 70s and 80s, it led to a series of recessions, and he wasn't afraid to do that. And why Jerome Powell is afraid of that? Probably for the reasons I already mentioned, right? Lobbying, special interests, having their own money and wealth tied up into this super bubble, right? Jeremy Grantham says that the Fed needs to stay on track with their interest rate hikes instead of pausing and buckling prematurely, because all that's going to do is it's going to send inflation roaring back. So if you think we have problems now, just wait and see what happens if the Fed stops raising rates or pivots prematurely. Jeremy Grantham thinks that a series of other problems that are going to be long-term are also going to be big contributors to inflation. Things like, you know, natural disasters ramping up. We have a lot more natural disasters these days than before, and not only is that very expensive when it comes to repairs and, you know, getting everything straightened out with it, but it disrupts the supply of commodities and it raises food prices. You also have aging populations that pose a risk as smaller workforces command higher wages. You got the biggest generation in history, the baby boomers, who are retiring, not working anymore, and there's not as many people to take their place. And the more money that companies have to pay people, then the more money people have to spend, which ultimately drives inflation and prices even higher. So this is kind of one of those things that's like the wage price spiral. With the more money that's in the system, just like we saw during the pandemic with all the stimulus, how do you think we got here, guys? How do you think we got to home prices going up 40% in 3 years and gas prices going up 50 or 60 or 70%, food prices up 50%, all of these things? You know, how did we get here? Because too much money chasing after the same things. Now, one thing I like to cover a lot here on the channel is negative equity and how people can end up upside down on their properties. And there was a great story today out of the UK of a woman that this exact thing happened to her recently. And it's a pretty long story, so I'm not going to sit here and go through the whole thing. I'm going to give you guys the gist of it, as I usually do. The way that things work in the UK is the government gives you help to buy a property in some cases. The bank owns 48% of her property, okay? The government owns 40%, and she only owns 12%. You could argue that she's not even the owner of this property. You know, a lot of you guys like to joke that you don't own your property, just don't pay your property tax bill and see what happens. Well, this is even worse than that. You have your property tax collector, you have the government and the mortgage company that have a higher share in your property than you do in this case. So another thing that's common in the UK, people get short-term mortgages over there that reset every few years. That's exactly what happened to this woman, and now she has to refinance the property and her payment's also going to be higher. But here's the problem. Home prices have been going down in her area, and now her place is worth $20,000 less than it was when she bought it. And you just can't make this stuff up, guys. Remember we talked about the divorce story the other day, that people are staying together and not getting divorced to keep the low interest rate? Well, this is exactly what's happening to this lady, only she's going through with the divorce, and she has to buy out her ex-husband at a time when interest rates are higher, and this is causing her big problems. Look at all that seaweed. And this is what I'm telling you guys when it comes to buying at the top of the market and the type of problems that it can put you in. Well, this lady now, when she's refinancing the property, she has to actually pay the bank $6,000 to come up with the shortage, the difference between the home's value and the refinance mortgage amount. So she is coming to the closing table owing $6,000 on a property that she already bought. And she says in this story that her grandfather actually warned her about getting into a situation like this many years ago when he was still alive. So basically this woman said that she didn't listen to her old grandfather's wise advice of you'd be crazy to buy at the top of the market, and went for it anyhow because she had FOMO. She saw all the headlines about prices going up and how people can't afford things, and she figured, well, I better buy now before I can't buy anything, which is what a lot of people, I think, thought over the last couple of years. But here's how this is even more messed up. Because she has part of her home owned by the government, which is ran by the Help to Buy program, it tracks the value of her home. And when the value of the home goes down, so does the amount that she owes, actually. So the government there doesn't keep you on the hook for a negative equity situation. This is a problem with her mortgage lender. But what's good news for her, even though her property value is going down and she doesn't owe as much on that loan anymore, it's bad news for the English taxpayers that have to pick up the bill on this. So this is what she says. She says when she bought this apartment, she pretty much gambled on the housing market, and she was hoping that it was all going to work out. She needed home prices to keep going up so she would accrue enough equity and eventually cash out and move on to a bigger place, which is what I think a lot of people plan to do when they buy a home in general. And the sad part is this woman bought the home thinking that this is going to give me more stability in life, which is one of my reasons that I bought as well, is just to have more stability, not to have to move anymore, not to have to answer to a landlord, be able to do what you want with the place, and not worried about getting kicked out and stuff like that. And she's basically giving people a warning that if you're in a situation like her, where you're putting down a low down payment on a property and you don't own very much of the house you're buying at all. When things start moving backwards, then you could be next when it comes to being in a negative equity situation. I wonder how many people in Austin, Texas, or San Francisco right now, or Phoenix, Arizona, are in a negative equity situation because they bought at the wrong time, top of the market, and now prices in these areas are down double digits. One thing I want to make clear is that I'm not telling people that they should never buy a house and real estate's a bad investment. Not at all. That's not what I'm saying. I believe in real estate just as much as I believe in gold and silver, but the problem is, guys, you don't get a mortgage to buy gold and silver. You don't have your life savings tied up and buying gold and silver. And this is not a sponsored video either, by the way. I'm just using this as an analogy here. But you do spend your life savings and you do get mortgages to buy a house, okay? And if that goes down in value, you can be on the hook for it. So the only safe way to buy real estate, no matter what the market's doing, is to be certain that you're gonna hang on to it for a very long time. And if you do decide to cash out prematurely, then make sure it's at a time when you're going to be making a profit when you sell. Now here's something really messed up that's going on right now. We saw the bank failures about a month ago, and we saw the FDIC and the Fed jump in to bail out these banks, okay? But yet at the same time now, you have banks like JP Morgan that are reporting record profits, okay? They have a $12.6 billion profit, and that's up from $8.3 billion from the same period a year ago. So my question is, why does our government, why does the Fed bail out these private institutions like this that are making record profits right now, but when one of them doesn't, it's a big problem? You know what I'm saying? If you start a business and you own a pottery store or a health food store and you start losing money every month, do you think they're gonna come in and start offering you money to make sure that your business doesn't go under? No, absolutely not. They don't care how many employees you have or who relies on running that business. You're done. But the banks, they get special treatment. But not only do the banks get special treatment, they also get to make their own rules in a sense, because the economy heavily relies on these banks lending out money in order for the world to turn. And they've announced that they're not going to be doing that nearly as much anymore after these bank failures. And the main reason is they want to have more cash set aside in case of more defaults. So they're anticipating that more people are not going to be paying their bills right now. And then you got Jamie Dimon coming out and saying, well, I wouldn't call this a credit crunch because he's, you know, the head over there at JP Morgan where they're having record profits. He's saying, think of it more as like putting your thumb on the scale, and it just makes the financing conditions a little bit tighter and increases the odds of a recession. Yeah, no kidding, if you don't already think this is a recession. But you can use whatever fancy name you want to call it, guys, just like they like to change the vocabulary on everything. But here's the facts. Commercial lending by US banks has declined by nearly $105 billion in the final 2 weeks of March, which is the largest drop on record. Ever. Ever. Does that not mean something? Is that not significant? I think a lot of people just want to wait for the government to come out and say, oh yeah, by the way, we're in a recession now, just so you know. And they need that confirmation from the higher ups to believe that it is a recession. But the problem is with people like that is by the time that happens, it's already too late. The recession had begun way before then, and you weren't ready. You're gonna get blindsided, and it's gonna be people like you that lose during a recession like this. Because contrary to what a lot of people think, recessions can be great opportunities, guys. You can make a lot of money in a recession, starting a new business and finding ways to meet people's needs that are not being met at a time when things are changing rapidly. So there's always opportunities, and recessions can be great opportunities, especially when prices on things start coming down. But here's the thing, if these banks don't keep more money on hand, then they're going to be in big trouble, because deposits in banks have dropped $760 billion from where they were a year ago. Check out this chart that just shows you how severe this really is about people pulling money out of banks. If they don't hang on to more cash, you're going to see bank failures left and right, and it's not going to be good for people. And what this does is it puts more competition on the banks to compete for your deposit money. So that means things like paying higher interest rates in the form of a high interest savings account, CD accounts, money market accounts, whatever they offer, in order to make sure you park your money with them instead of someone else. And if you believe the inflation numbers, which I don't, but if you believe that inflation now is at 5%, you could essentially get a CD that pays 5% and cancel out that inflation and kind of protect that portion of your wealth in a CD. But the problem is those CD rates are not going to remain at 5% forever. And what do you do after that? Now let's move back to real estate here for a minute. For the first time in 3 years, according to Redfin, the rent prices are finally starting to drop. But it's not by much, guys. We're talking median asking rents dropping 0.4%, okay, year over year as of March. So that means the new median rent price across the country is $1,937 a month. Still a lot of money. And Redfin is saying that this is because of all the new multifamily units that are being delivered to the rental market. And I told you guys about this last week, that throughout the year, you're gonna see about 500,000 new multifamily rentals delivered onto the US rental market. So this is good news for renters, and I'm not gonna make a big deal about a 0.4% drop like some of the columnists like to do about the mortgage rates or whatever, but the good thing about it is that things are moving in the right direction for renters, because for a long time, it's just moving up. And look at Austin, Texas, guys. These guys are just getting slammed from every angle, not just with home prices coming down, but with rent prices too. And while this is good for the people that live there, it's not so good for investors that bought in this area thinking that this is gonna just go up forever. According to Redfin, the rental prices in Austin went down by 11.2%, and in Chicago, the rents went down by more than 9%. So those are the top two on the rental price decline list from Redfin right now. And like I said before, the housing market's different everywhere, right? Well, there's places that saw rents go up still. You have places like Cleveland, Ohio, Raleigh, North Carolina. They saw double-digit rent increases year over year, okay? Talking 16.6% increases in these areas. So the reality is, when you hear information like this regarding the rent or home prices going down in some areas and still going up in other areas, you really have to use your own smarts with this. You have to look at what's happening in your area to determine whether or not buying or renting is the best choice. Because, you know, I could make 10 videos on that subject and the answer would still be different for everyone, guys. It depends on your financial situation. Depends on how long you plan on staying in the area. Depends on your family situation. It depends on what the market's doing in the area. It depends on so many different things that really only you can make the decision of what's the best thing to do. And that's one of my main goals here on the channel, is to just help guide people with that. Because I see comments all the time saying, oh, I wish you were making these videos back in 2008, Michael, because you would have saved me so much money back then. And I've heard people write me recently saying, you saved me so much money by not doing this and I did that instead. And it makes me feel good that what I'm doing here is making a difference for so many of you who watch the channel. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who does watch my videos. It really means a lot to me, and I appreciate it. Without you guys, I would have no channel. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you click the bell notification down below. YouTube will alert you every time I post a new video. And if you don't want to wait, check out my next one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.